Jeremy Clark here, aka Phils Jackson on Twitter, and coming to you on the Crypto Cartel Discord. I'm going to just do this quick little video on how do we find the trend. Looking at the trend on the daily, I've been using the central floor pivot and the first two pivots, R1 and S1, to determine the trend. And how do we do that? So essentially, the idea is that in a downtrend, price will not test R1. And I'm just going to grab a little arrow here. Where's my arrow? Dun, 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 dun. There we go. And let's make this nice and red so we can see it. Okay, so here's R1, and here's S1 down here. And so what I look for, this is on Phantom, I look to see if price came up to R1, never touched it, never came close, and then it broke below the central floor pivot. Anything below the central floor pivot is considered bearish, and the bottom central is the line where you would enter. So I would wait for price to come down and test the top, test the middle, and then I would look for price to break below the bottom central of the central floor pivot, and I'd look for volume. And you can see we're getting above average volume right here. So that would be a good entry. My first target would be S1, and you could take partial profits there or get all out. And then I would wait to see if it broke S1 again on volume. You can see it did pretty heavily with these three candles. And so you could continue going short, and you could add in other targets at that point. I typically use the cams, and I know I've mentioned the cam area pivot points to you guys a lot. So this is something kind of different that I'm doing just to find the daily trend. Once I find the trend and I find my entry, then I might switch to the cam area pivots just to find exits and good targets. Another target after S1 would be S2. That's a floor pivot. But I find that price really likes to hover around the Camarilla pivots. So I typically use those as my targets. And this is just to show me the daily trend. Now I'm going to switch over to Bitcoin and show you the same concept. And let's go ahead and grab a arrow. There we go. So again, you can see price never quite got up to R1. Looks like it tried to right here. And then it broke below the central floor pivot. And here's where I would enter. There's a lot of volume happening, above average volume happening right here. So a really good short for me would be below the central floor pivot to S1. And then you could trail your stop, or you could filter in some other target points. So I'm going to go back a little bit here and just take a look at the trend as it's been unfolding over the last few days. So, and again, the idea is that if price is testing R1, it's probably an uptrend. If price is testing S1, it's probably a downtrend. What do you do on a day where it tests both? In my opinion, if it's testing both R1 and S1, it's probably a sideways consolidation day. There could be some great range trading opportunities there, but just know that, you know, you're not going to be able to play the trend as well on a day like that. So just looking back here, you can see that price hit R1, came down to the central floor pivot, never tested S1. So I would say this is kind of the end of our uptrend right here. And then on the next day, it never got to R1. Instead came really close to S1, and it was underneath the central floor pivot. So that could have been a good short opportunity right there. Now we got a real narrow CFP, central floor pivot right here. That's a good sign that it could break out. And you'll notice that price was kind of sideways. So it didn't really go anywhere. So this might have been kind of a consolidation day. Next day, we got kind of a narrow central floor pivot. Again, price never tested R1, never tested R1, never tested R1. So usually after 2 days of consolidation, you'll get a good breakout, and that's what we got right here. So again, central floor pivot to S1 would be your first target. And then this looks like it maybe went all the way to S2, maybe further. The next day, again, we're in a downtrend. There's no R1. Once we got below the central floor pivot, there was a really good drop from CFP to S1. And then the same thing here, CFP to S1. So those were two great short entries that happened on that day. The next day, looks like we got a little bit of sideways action, and then we shot up to R1. So you can see the trend changed here. We never tested S1, and price moved above the central floor pivot, and then it went up to CFP. Or I'm sorry, went up to R1. So we could have played CFP to R1 and even further. Then today happens, and we miss hitting R1, break below the central floor pivot, and there's my entry, CFP to S1, and then we'll see what happens down here. Okay, guys, so that's how you find the trend, or rather, that's how you let the central floor pivots find the trend for you. And once you determine that, you can determine if the trend is up or down, and if you want to go short or go long. You always want to trade with the trend if you can, because it makes your trade direction go a little easier. But keep in mind, anything can happen. Anything can change at a moment's notice. The market is always in flux. And so what we look for is probabilities. We look for volume and certain levels to be breaking down, other levels not to be tested. And that puts everything in your favor. If you don't have those things, you might want to wait and wait for them to form up. All right. So again, shout out to my guys at the Crypto Cartel Discord. If anyone is interested in joining, you can hit up at Streets No Name on Twitter, or myself at Phils Jackson, and I'll see you out there. Keep it green.